Chapter 40. Rebellion. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Rebel me. Amen. It was not my initial intention, but when my territory starts to be successful, the problems will come to me, and I will have no choice. These noble families from the Brown Kingdom would probably try to take me away as the sovereign of the Black Plain, or the royal family would want a big chunk of my region's revenue. And since I am not someone who accepts this type of situation, in which I do all the work, and then someone comes and tries to take it for himself, there is only the option of rebellion. It's inevitable. Minos said while having an indifferent expression on his face. He had no problem saying this to these people. After all, Elin and her Nash family couldn't reject him. They could not invade the Black Plain, as this would cause a war in the region against them. As for doing business with a rebel, well, the Nash family was a merchant power, so they were going to do business. As long as they could win something, they wouldn't care about their partner's problems. Who didn't have their own business to do? The Nash family itself had theirs. His thinking is sensible. The three beautiful ladies thought at the same time. Of course, as long as the Black Plain was a poor place with no options, no one would want to hold on to that hot potato. However, from the moment that agriculture was made possible in these regions, then the Black Plain would become even more important than an area of medium-level spiritual density, such as the Red Valley, even though it is only an area of low spiritual concentration. That's because the Black Plain, with its 200,000 square kilometers, had almost 18% of the Brown Kingdom's territory. With such an area, even if cultures were cultivated with a low amount of spiritual energy, for those noble families, this would still be enough to yield a few million low-grade spiritual crystals a year, which would be enough to nourish a colossal amount of subordinates and members of a family. Minos then continued to expose his ideas to the young women around him. But you shouldn't be worried about that in the short term, Miss Elin. From what I was told by my subordinates, the last time that a nobleman from a large family passed through the Dry City was more than 20 years ago. The king himself must have only bothered to know something about the region 7 years ago, when my father died, and the region was passed on to me, as his inheritance. As for the other smaller noble families, only one of them has contact with the Dry City, which is the Gill family. However, even they will not be able to know about the new reality of the Black Plain in the short term. Minos was sure about this, as he had consistently pulled the director of the Black Stars Academy, Lionel Gill. He found out that Mr. Lionel, despite being the director of this spiritual academy, he only came to the Dry City if someone with black talent showed up, like the three youths who had previously appeared. Other than that, he stayed in other places almost all the time. After the last meeting with Minos, Lionel and young Ralph's family left the Dry City, and none of them had returned, even after more than a year. As for the subordinates of the Black Stars Academy, who could pass on some information to the Gill family, Minos had brought them all to his side. He dispersed a good amount of crystals to convince each one of them not pass on any information that could attract someone from the Gill family to the Black Plain region. Not only that, the Gill family did not know, but the Black Stars Academy no longer existed within the Black Plain, and now called the Preparatory Academy of the Dry City, which the Black Plain Army directly commanded. Such a change had taken place more than a year ago. Not only that, each employee received a salary that was 3 times higher than before this change. Therefore, they were all very happy and had no intention of returning to the old reality. Minos then continued. In fact, no one cares what happens in the Dry City, they would even like the region to become independent, but no one has ever taken the initiative to do so. At that moment, Ruth spoke for the first time since Minos, and the two beautiful young women had started to argue. She then asked with a confused expression on her face. If that's the case, then why don't you declare the region's independence and avoid these problems? This would make your situation much easier. Minos smiled at young Ruth's naive question and answered. Because it wouldn't be that easy. If I decreed independence as soon as I got there in the Dry City, a place that I would practically not be able to increase my wealth or strength, what would they think of this action? Elin then responded nonchalantly. They would ask what gave you the confidence to accept such a burden. That's right, after that, I would probably be watched for a long time by the spies of the great noble families of the Brown Kingdom. With that, they would either quickly find out what I did, or I could do nothing until I was sure that I would not be watched. For the first option, I would be killed or lose everything in a few weeks after arriving in the Black Plain. As for the second, I would be considerably behind in my plans, and after I started, there would still be a war against me anyway. That would be inevitable. They would not accept that I keep everything to myself. They would simply say that the independence was irregular, or any excuse of that kind to invade us and take everything we produced. Minos spoke resolutely while looking at Ruth. Speaking like that, there really is no easy way out. Ruth thought to herself as Minos' problems entertained her. Anyway, it should still be a few years before they find out. As long as I don't do business within the kingdom or in the maritime city, we will not be threatened by this. And with a maximum of 4 years, my forces will be able to deal with this type of threat, Minos said with a cold sparkle in his eyes. It looks like you already thought of everything. Elend said after letting out a big breath. This ally of hers was really a person who was thinking ahead. This is good. At least the chances of him building an empire and falling overnight will be less. She did not worry that Minos would have such problems in the future since, in the spiritual world, anyone who has anything of value will have to go through trials. But not everyone thought like Minos. Many of them neglected these problems or even trusted the idea that nothing would go wrong. So, it was not uncommon to see someone quickly rise to success, creating their brands or raising the status of their families, only to fall to an even lower level than they were at the beginning of it all when they were not killed. This was the cruel reality of the spiritual world. Did you inherit or get a high-level treasure? Did you deserve it because of your talent or your hard work? Congratulations on reaching such an achievement, but you are weak, give it to me. This was the brutal reality of this world. Well, leave that matter for the future. You said you want to sell your products at a lower price, right? How about we sell your products for 10 low-grade crystals per kilo? That is just 20% of the price charged for items of such quality on the Stone Island. Elend said, looking directly into Minos' eyes. MNN, this price is good. Minos said when he had thought of something. I want to know if you have your own place to sell these products yourself, or if you just pass it on to some organization on Stone Island. I have my own store. Why the question? Elend said curiously. I have an idea, but I don't know if it can cause any problems. Anyway, I want to know if there is how your subordinates can advertise the dry city to their weakest customers. Say that the price of a kilo of these products in the dry city is only 4 low-grade crystals, Minos said with a smile on his face. Elend then smiled after hearing this. So this is what you are thinking. You want to attract the weaker population of Stone Island to your region. Well, I can do that. It shouldn't be a problem as it wouldn't affect the local community that much if some less talented people left Stone Island. Minos was pleased when he heard that. Even if he did not attract the attention of many people, this could be enough to attract some less talented alchemists, blacksmiths, and array masters to the dry city, such as those that Minos had already contacted. If these people knew that Minos could keep up with the commercial offer that he had made, then that would be very tempting for many of them. And that was his main objective concerning this advertisement, to attract this type of cultivator. As for the possible migrations of ordinary people with white talent to the Black Plain from Stone Island, well, Minos had room for millions of them since their territory had almost 20 million hectares available for planting. Of course, he would not receive all these people from one place since that would be problematic. However, the Black Plain would have room for any of them. Chapter 41. A Beauty That Brings Problems, *, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Well, that was all I had to say to you about our business. I will still be here for a few days in the capital of Stone Island, as I have to buy some products for my region. Minos said after getting up and getting ready to leave. At that moment, Elena said with a smile on her face. If you want, this older sister can accompany you. I know all the best stores in Old Stone City. Certainly, this can make things easier for you. After hearing this, Elin looked at Elena strangely, as if she were saying to walk away. Oh. Since that is the case, I will have to thank Miss Elena for your kindness in advance. Minos gratefully responded to her offer. Hee, you can just call me Elena. I don't like being called in such a distant way. Okay, so call me Minos too. Shortly thereafter, Minos, Ruth, and Elena said goodbye to Elin and headed for the exit of the Nash family palace, heading towards the central part of the city. Elena would show Minos the best places to do business. In another part of the Nash family palace, a young man with blonde hair and green eyes was lying on his bed with a beautiful young woman lying on him without any clothes. They were both completely sweaty, and a loud breathing sound could be heard from both of them. When the beautiful young woman recovered from her recent activity, she said with a smile on her face. Young master, as I said before, I have something important to report. It's about Miss Elin. My brother, who works as a guard at the palace entrance gate, told me that a young man came to meet her earlier today. Oh. Tell me about it. The young man spoke while his eyes flashed chillingly. He then got up and started putting on his clothes, leaving the beautiful lady on his bed. She then said. According to him, that person came here to find Miss Elin, on the pretext that they were business partners. After that, he spent a few hours at her residence before finally leaving with that girl named Elena. Then another one came along with the same excuse as an ally. Well, it seems that I have to teach this guy a lesson. Does he not know that it is wrong to covet others' woman? The young man said with a murderous tone in his voice. And even if he's just an ally, it's still good that he knows who he's messing with. I will make him understand that he must not think funny things about my Elin. After hearing this, the naked young woman lying on the bed smiled kindly. She was one of the servants of this young blonde man named Luke Nash. He was the youngest son of the patriarch of the Nash family, who had a black talent, and at the age of 18, he was already at level 40. As for his relationship with young Elin, well. He was in love with her, but this was not reciprocal. However, this young master did not care about that and used his influence as a young master of the Nash family to ward off potential loving competitors. Elin knew that this young man had the illusion that she would become his wife one day. Also, he used his influence to chase any man who came into contact with her, but she was not too concerned about that since she was much stronger than him. And although she didn't like young Luke's intrusions, most of the youths who tried to contact her were really individuals with no commercial relationship with her, so Luke's actions even helped her a little. And that is why she had never done anything against this young master in her family. After finishing dressing, young Luke left his room and quickly went to look for some guards to look for Minos. He was very irritated by the constant appearance of people trying to woo his beloved Elin. After a while walking around the palace, he came to a large room, where many guards were sitting in different corners, talking actively. Luke approached a tall, bald man and said. Guard Brian, I want you to find someone for me. Talk to Nydia's brother, who is working at the palace entrance gate, and resolve this as soon as possible. He will describe that person to you. Okay, young master. The man greeted him and then left quickly, heading for the Nash property exit. Well, I can't wait to meet you. Young Luke said in a low voice, as he sawed his fist tightly and had a look of few friends on his face. Time passed quickly, and it had been 2 days since Minos had met young Elin. In the meantime, he was guided by the beautiful Elena Neal through the capital of Stone Island to do the shopping he had previously planned. By that time, he had already bought all the spiritual weapons he could, leaving only the pills and the grade .2, low.grade, array, to finish. But it was not easy to buy so many spiritual pills, as had been the case with weapons. This is because Stone Island was not a region specialized in this profession. Therefore, Minos had to do his shopping in several places and still order some of these pills. That way, he still had to wait for a few more days before returning to his territory. As for the spiritual array of grade .2, low level, there were few array masters with this classification, even in the capital, Old Stone. So, it was not easy to find these specialists, and they were often busy with other matters, such as cultivating or producing their products. So, despite needing only one array, Minos had still not been able to buy it. In these 2 days, Minos also had the opportunity to know the beautiful young Elena better. He found out a little about the big families of Stone Island and, in particular, the Neal family, which was a large family of blacksmiths from this region. He also discovered that young Elena was the daughter of one of the elders of this great noble family. However, she had not specialized in this profession since she preferred to become a traditional fighter. He learned that she, like Elin, had black talent, and according to Ruth, she was already at level 44, which could be considered very good since she was only 24 years old. He had also come very close to Elena in the meantime and even got used to the young woman's libertine way of life, having sometimes accompanied her in her flirtations. I already showed you all the best places for you to buy your spiritual pills in those 2 days. As for the array master, have one of your guards keep looking for them until one of them appears. This shouldn't take too long, as a new business can emerge at any time. I'm going to do this. Thanks for the help over those 2 days, Elena. Minos said in gratitude. You don't have to thank me. How about you come to my house for dinner, alone, before you return to the Black Plain? I'm sure you'll love to taste my culinary skills. Elena said with a provocative smile on her face. What a whore on offer. Ruth, who was nearby, thought she listened to Minos and Elena's conversation. For her, a young virgin, Elena's offered behavior was very strange to see up close, even though Ruth knew it was common in the spiritual world. However, doing this in front of her was somewhat disconcerting. Actually, I was already curious about that. You've been talking a lot about your culinary skills these past few days. Okay, how about we meet in 2 days? Minos said as he cast an interesting look in the direction of the seductive Elena. There was no way a young, single teenager like Minos would refuse such an offer. Even if she didn't invite him, he would still try to bring her even closer to him, inviting her to dinner at the apartment he had rented at the Olsen Hotel. That's fine with me. I can't wait for that. Elena said after biting her lip and winking at Minos. After that, the group broke up, with Minos and Ruth returning to the Hotel Olsen and Elena heading towards her family's mansion on the city's south side. This Minos is also no better than that bitch. Ruth thought to herself while showing a look of discontent directed at Minos. In a certain part of the Nash family palace, moans of pleasure could be heard coming from a room on the south side of the building. Pa. 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 Deeper. Ah. Amid the sounds of pleasure, 2 people could be seen wrapped around each other, while the sounds of pounding flesh sounded constantly. The 2 people were completely naked, while they had beads of sweat all over their bodies. One could also notice a strong smell in the air, which was typical of this type of activity. Of the 2 people, the young man under the bed was the young Master Luke, who displayed pleasure while enjoying the beautiful young woman with full breasts on top of him. This was one of his servants, with whom he entertained himself from time to time. The beautiful young woman moaned in an erotic voice as she went up and down on young Master Luke's rod. I'm coming. After a few minutes of activity, the couple slowly ended their relationship. The 2 were completely satisfied as they rested with their bodies still connected to each other. Not long after, a noise could be heard by the bedroom door when a hoarse voice came from outside. Young master, we have already located that person. Oh. It was about time. Luke thought to himself, as he felt his servant's graceful body. Chapter 42. Dead End. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After hearing this, Luke took a quick shower and dressed in a high-end outfit that was worthy of his position within the Nash family. He then left his room and went to his living room to hear Guard Brian's report. When he entered the room, a tall, bald man, wearing armor with a silver ship symbol, was already waiting for him in readiness. Luke sat in an armchair while holding a bunch of spiritual grapes in one of his hands. And then? What did you find out? Luke Nash asked with a strange smile on his face before putting one of the grapes in his mouth. The guard, who was standing in front of the young man's armchair, then began to report his findings. Well, to begin with, the young man in question, he is called Minas Stewart. However, there is no noble family with this name on the Stone Island, which proves that it comes from outside our region. But we don't know specifically where he is from since we don't know any large families in the north of the central continent with this surname. Therefore, I cannot say whether there is a great power supporting him or not. The guard said calmly as he watched the young Luke's reaction. The young Luke seemed interested as he listened, showing a smile on his face. He thought, there is probably no great power with that surname. It must be just from a small family that has recently ascended. This is great. It means that I can take the risk and do what I want. When Guard Brian realized that the young master in front of him had no intention of interrupting him, he continued to speak. In the meantime, he hasn't met Miss Elin either again. In fact, for the past 2 days, that young woman from the Neal family, Elena Neal, was always with him and his group. They stopped by many stores in the city, buying a lot of spiritual weapons, pills, and even looking for a grade 2 array masters. This leads me to think that he really is a business partner of Miss Elin, who came to the Stone Island to do business with her and buy items for his forces. It may also indicate that he does not come from any great strength, as he needs to leave his region to come here on the Stone Island, or that he cannot do that in his region for any reason. That seems to make sense. Luke thought as he nodded. Guard Brian then continued his report. I also found out that he is staying at the Hotel Olsen, which is in the central part of the Old Stone City. In addition to him, there are also 11 other people in his group, with all of them in the 5th stage of cultivation, general spiritual. Of these people, 10 of them are at level 40, while there is a young woman who is at level 45. When young Luke heard that, he frowned slightly and said, his escort is somewhat exaggerated. Even though most of them are at level 40, 10 of them would still be able to hold someone at level 48 if they were well trained to work as a team. And there's still a person at level 45. TSK, even I wouldn't have strength like that when I go on a trip, Biov, but this is somewhat contradictory. He has such strength in escorting him, but does he still need to come to Stone Island to do business? Very strange. Brian nodded and then spoke again. But there is something strange about this young woman in question. I bribed an employee at the Hotel Olsen and found out that they did not arrive together. And neither of them looked for the other when they checked into the hotel, almost as if they had met for the first time in the past 2 days. As for Minas Stewart, he is only in the 4th stage, spiritual warrior, at level 33. Oh. He's pretty weak then. Perhaps he is just an arrogant young master who went out to do business for the first time. But this is good. It will be even easier to teach this guy a lesson. Luke said with a smile on his face. Guard Brian agreed and then suggested. If I may, young master, I think we should try to separate this young Minas from his team, especially this young woman who is with him. After that, the young master can teach him a lesson quickly. You're right, Guard Brian. I was right to talk to you earlier. So, stay like this, let's separate these people, and I'll attack the brat later. One day went by, and a group of 6 people was driving in a carriage to a region with many stores specializing in alchemy close to the central area of Old Stone City. They were Minas, Ruth, and 4 more soldiers who were escorting young Stewart today. Today Minas would receive part of the pills that he had ordered in the past 2 days, but he would still have to return to other stores in the next few days to receive all the orders he had placed. Ruth then started talking to Minos. You could have stayed at the hotel and sent one of your subordinates to do this and focus on cultivating for the spiritual tournament. Do not worry about that. I train enough, but sometimes relaxing and getting to know new places can become a powerful tonic. When you do something for a long time, your mind starts to make certain mistakes because there is no rest. That way, relaxing from time to time doing different things can help you solve certain problems more quickly. Minos said without many expressions on his face. Oh. You talk like you're a sage. She said while having a different thought in mind. Humph, you can create any excuse you want. After some more time, the group collected their parcels in some of the stores that they passed and then started to head towards the restaurant, the barbecue temple, to have lunch. However, halfway through, one of Minos' soldiers heard a rumor and stopped the carriage immediately. What happened, Sergeant Pike? Young master, we heard that a grade .2 array master has left isolated cultivation and is receiving new orders. This specialist has a residence on the south side of the city. Should we go there? Upon hearing this, Minos was pleased with the news and immediately agreed. That would advance his plans a lot. The group then made their way towards the southern part of the city, where the array master's property was located. It didn't take long, and they started approaching a medium-sized building with only 2 floors. It could not be considered either new or old, but it had a silver symbol with a ship. Oh! I did not think that the Nash family had an array master of such a level. Why is it that neither Elin nor Elena told me about it? Minos thought to himself, seeing that symbol. Soon after, the group started to get out of the carriage, heading towards the building's interior. There was no garden at the entrance. After all, it was just a commercial building. But they noticed that there was very little movement in the place. In fact, there were only 5 other people besides the group of Minos in the place. They were all above level 40, as Ruth had warned the young steward, as soon as they got there. There was a middle-aged man behind a counter just outside the building wearing silver armor. Hello, visitors, are you here to order an array? Minos then replied with a smile on his face. That's right. I want to order a grade .2 array. Are you the array master of this place? The bald man then smiled and said. Oh. No, the master is in the courtyard on the 2nd floor. He is currently available to receive new orders, but only one person can go up at one time to speak to him. Ruth frowned and said. Just one person. What a strange rule. Haha, I'm sorry about that, but our master doesn't like to interact with people more than necessary. The tall, bald man said with an apologetic smile on his face. It doesn't matter. I'm going up while you wait for me down here. Minos said as he headed for the stairs that were not far from the bald man's counter. Don't worry about it too much. You can come up here, young man. The man smiled strangely while pointing to Minos. Sometime later, Minos arrived at a large hall on the building's 2nd floor. In that place, there was no furniture or any other item, just a young blond man dressed in a luxurious silver robe. He was smiling when he saw Minos enter. What a strange thing, it doesn't seem right. Minos thought to himself. Shortly thereafter, a grade .2, low-level, insulation array was activated. This array prevented people below level 40 from entering or leaving the space around that place. Not only that, but the sound was also completely isolated. An array has been activated. It looks like this guy sealed this area. Minos thought calmly as he looked around. Now you're at a dead end. You will not be able to receive any help for at least 10 minutes. I want you to know that this is just to teach you a lesson for contacting my woman. If you do any grace after that, so I will not be merciful again. The blond young man said with a crazed gleam in his eyes. Chapter 43. An idiot. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The young blonde man looked at Minos with an expression of contempt. At the same time, the young steward had a confused expression on his face. Did I contact your woman? Who is this guy talking about? Minos was not afraid because although he did not know his opponent's strength, he was still sure that this blonde young man did not pass the beginning of the 5th stage of cultivation, general spiritual. This is because if it were stronger, then there would be no need for the spiritual array that was previously activated. This young man was probably trying to separate Minos from his soldiers, so he shouldn't be that strong. And even if it were the case that it was someone Minos couldn't handle, then he could still escape to the spatial kingdom. Bnoel.m. Minos looked at the young blonde man, wearing a silver robe and seemed to be preparing to attack him. He then started talking while his brows were constricted. Did you say you are going to teach me a lesson? Can I know what your name is and who is this woman I contacted? Does this guy have any relationship with Elena? But I haven't even done anything with her yet, and we were accompanied by other people all the time. Minos thought to himself while waiting for an answer from the young man in front of him. When Luke heard Minos's question, he laughed and said, So you mess with other people's woman and still ask who I am, huh? But that's okay. I'm going to give you the pleasure of knowing my name. I am the young master of the Nash family, Luke Nash. So scared of whom you dared to provoke? Young Luke asked with a smirk on his face. The young master of the Nash family. Minos thought to himself. He didn't have much information about this person, but he had heard from Elena that the Nash family had 2 young masters. However, she had not gone into detail about anything important about them. Are you not mistaking me for someone? I just arrived in this city, and I haven't met many people here. Elena was the only woman I spent more time with, but she didn't tell me that she had a boyfriend. Maybe that's what you're talking about? Minos asked with a trace of curiosity on his face. Upon hearing this, Luke felt an even greater urge to hit this guy in front of him. He then started to speak with even more anger, to the point of screaming like crazy. Elena! Don't play dumb. You know very well that I'm not talking about that woman. Enough talk. If I don't spank you until you're half dead, then I won't be able to have peace. This guy is an idiot. If it is not Elena, then there is no one else with whom I came into contact. Well, he will serve as my fighting partner until that array falls apart. Hitting a lunatic shouldn't be bad. Minos thought calmly, shaking his head from side to side while watching Luke's absurd behavior. After that, Luke quickly activated his attack technique, Assassin's Claws, which created a blade of energy in the user's hands. This was a black-grade technique specializing in hand-to-hand fighting. Indestructible Body. Devouring Art. Meanwhile, Minos activated his own defense and support techniques. Almost immediately, a black circumference formed over the area isolated by the spiritual array. Luke didn't know, but using this array was a double mistake for him because Minos was his enemy. With the devouring art, not only was the spiritual energy of Minos' enemies sucked but the energy contained in the array would also be sucked in. This was simply because spiritual arrays used spiritual energy to function. Thus, although it could not affect the part of the energy of the array that was already in operation, Minos could consume the energy stored in it, reducing the time of operation of the array and weakening it. Not long ago, when he was still in the Portland area, the young Daryl's defensive array had been broken both by the attacks it received and by the devoured art of Minos, which was draining its reserves. Jumping the mountain. Luke activated his movement technique shortly thereafter. He didn't want to let his enemy last any longer. He wanted to immobilize Minos and then torture him until the spiritual array he had set up stopped working. Whoosh! Then, Luke quickly jumped in front of Minos and made several blows towards the young man's belly in front of him. When Luke's blade-filled hands approached his opponent's helpless body, he slowly curved his lips upward. It's over. Luke thought to himself. Poof! However, to Luke's surprise, his attack was completely stopped on Minus' body. It seemed that his enemy's flesh was as hard as a high-level spiritual weapon. Then, Luke's pupils opened in shock as a thought passed through his mind. What the fuck? How can he have such a sturdy body, being only at level 33? At the same time, Minus smiled when he saw the blades of energy touching his abdomen while leaving tears in the clothes he wore. He then removed a sword from his spatial ring and began to attack. Spatial sword. Minus did not give Luke time to breathe by activating his own attack technique. The surrounding space quickly started to stop, while Luke had his speed reduced. Minus then made a move with his sword, delivering a blow in the direction of Luke's right arm. Swoosh. When he saw this attack coming towards him, Luke cursed Minus in his mind while activating his defense and movement techniques at the same time. He could not take this blow lightly because this attack was even stronger than his by Luke's. Damn it. How can this be? Why is this guy so strong? He thought to himself as he tried to escape Minus's coup. The blow passed quickly over the right side of Luke's body. He had barely avoided it, but it had cost him a lot. After all, activating two techniques for someone at level 40 was still not easy. This certainly required a lot of spiritual energy, something he did not have yet, to be able to fight at high intensity for a long time. Phew. Ah. I almost got it right. However, this wretch must have spent everything he had on this technique. Luke said with a smile on his face. Haha, this one you didn't expect, huh? And now, will you be able to launch another one of these? However, while young Luke laughed happily, Minus made another movement with the sword while running towards him. Spatial sword. Swoosh. Minus's blade quickly started to approach Luke's straight shoulder. Disgrace. How can he do that? The young master of the Nash family thought to himself while having his speed severely reduced. Steel shield. Luke promptly activated his defensive technique with all of his remaining spiritual energy. He knew that with his condition, if he used two techniques simultaneously, he would not be successful this time. That way, he could only defend himself against this attack. Crash. Minus' sword and Luke's shield briefly touched, but shortly thereafter, Luke could not hold on to this attack and be thrown backward, hitting his back hard against a wall. Aya. Pow. Minus lowered his sword after seeing this. He was almost exhausted and had beads of sweat all over his face. Although he could use his opponent's energy, it was not easy to fight with such a difference in levels. It looks like he is completely exhausted. When he thought that, Minus looked towards the spiritual array that was beginning to exhibit several lines of cracks in the air. Meanwhile, Minus was walking towards the young Luke, who was in a miserable state, with many cuts in his luxurious clothing and blood covering his right shoulder. He was in a prone position while spitting out a mouth full of blood. Clearly, the previous blow had caused damage to his internal organs. Luke then thought as he looked at the cracks in the air. Good thing the array is almost breaking. If it took much longer, who knows what this monster could do to me. Minus stopped in front of him and asked with a serious face. What is the name of the girl you were talking about before? Luke looked at Minus with an expression of fear. Elin Nash. After hearing this, Minus opened his mouth in surprise. It seems that I was not wrong. This guy is stupid. Well, I don't have that kind of relationship with Miss Elin, but since you attacked me, I will keep all of your belongings in your spatial ring, Minus said with a smile on his face as he quickly picked up a ring that was on one of the fingers of young Luke's right hand. What? You can't do that. These are the Nash family's belongings. Luke brandished in an appealing voice. I know that. But it's your fault for challenging someone like me. Minus smiled as he kept the ring inside his own. Crack. After that, the spiritual array collapsed, and Minus headed towards the stairs to return to the first floor. He was curious to see if those people at the concierge had caused any problems for his group. Chapter 44. Luke's Belongings. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 44. Luke's belongings. As he calmly descended the stairs, Minos decided to take a look at the young Luke's belongings. Considering the Nash family's economic power, this young master must have considerable wealth. He thought to himself before checking Luke's spatial ring. Minos was not concerned that Luke's subordinates had done something for his soldiers. That's because the beautiful Ruth was with the group. In the past few days, while living with Ruth on a daily basis, Minos had learned a little about the young woman. He knew she was at level 45, just 18 years old. She also had an enviable silver grade talent, which made her an important disciple of the Grey Cloud sect. With that, considering the support she had within this flaming empire sect, she certainly had silver grade techniques. And even though Ruth didn't tell Minos about her techniques, he was sure that she had at least 2 techniques at this level. That's because even the Brown Kingdom royal family had one. So, a sect like the one Ruth came from certainly had many of those techniques. That way, an important disciple with her would certainly receive excellent treatment. So, Minos was confident that unless a spiritual king intervened, Ruth could handle any situation. And he knew that, in the north of the central continent, no one would put someone on this level to protect a young man within his own city. Hell, even if these young masters left their kingdoms, their families still wouldn't send someone like that to protect them. This would only happen if they left the northern region of the central continent. But this was not common, and it was far from the current situation of Minos. As to why the families did not protect their young masters so much that they sent spiritual kings to protect them, well, that is because there were few individuals at this level. Even when analyzing the numbers of an entire kingdom, there would still be no more than 300 people at this level. Thus, the chance for a spiritual king to act against the most privileged descendants of a large family was very small. And these young masters were also educated never to offend someone of this level, especially when they were away from their families. So, there was no need to use the few experts at that level to escort young masters. Anyway, Minos finally managed to probe the young Luke's spatial ring after a few breaths. Oh! As expected, there is actually a silver grade technique. Not only that, it's a cultivation technique, something that can greatly speed up someone's cultivation speed. Minos thought to himself, looking at the silver parchment in his right hand. It also explained why Luke had a higher level than the young master of the Silva family, Daryl. Despite being almost the same age, the young master of the Nash family probably trained a silver grade cultivation technique since he was 10 years old. Meanwhile, Daryl used only a black grade technique to cultivate. Minos then looked at the other items inside the ring. There were 50,000 low grade crystals, 300 medium grade crystals, 1 grade .2 low grade weapon, 3 other grade .1 weapons for black grade techniques, and several grade .1 spiritual pills. It looks like the Nash family is actually a lot richer than the Silva family. Minos thought as he looked at Luke's belongings. On the first floor of the building where Minos and his group were, there were 4 men beside the stairs he had passed previously. Anyone who looked at it would immediately think they were on guard in that place. And indeed, that was the group's purpose, but their justification was that they were preventing their master from being irritated by contacting more people than he needed. Another man was sitting on a chair, who was behind a bench, near the stairs. This man wore silver armor and had no hair on his head. These 5 men were the subordinates that the young Luke had brought into this trap. At the same time, another 5 people were divided into 2 groups. With 4 men in similar clothes, one of them is waiting by the window, and a beautiful young woman, with long black hair, was sitting in an armchair, not far from the counter of the bald man. During the time that Minos had gone up to see the array master, there was no action on the part of the 10 people who were here at that time. On the side of the Minos group, this was just a business, and although unusual, strange behaviors like that of this array master were not new. Therefore, none of them suspected that this was a plan to separate Minos from them. As for Luke's subordinates, they didn't want to take any chances because of Ruth. They knew nothing of this young woman, and she showed no discomfort while waiting for Minos. What's more, they probably would not have to act since after their young master returned, they would leave immediately. And the group of Minos could not follow them, since the poor young man would certainly need urgent medical care. That way, everything was peaceful on the first floor of the building. Some time passed, and finally, footsteps could be heard coming from the stairs. It seems that the young master has already finished playing with that guy. One of the 4 subordinates thought to himself, while he had a smile on his face. Already. I thought that Minos would last until the spiritual array stopped working, but it hasn't even lasted half the time. The bald man thought, with a disappointed look on his face. However, when they saw the person who had arrived by the stairs, the 5 men were completely pale in surprise. What happened? Why was this person here? Shouldn't he be almost dying? But if he is here, what happened to the young master? They all had these questions in their minds. At the same time, Minos' group was confused when they saw the young steward's clothes, with some tears in his belly and a tired look on his face. Ruth then got up from the chair where she was sitting and asked. What happened? No big deal, that was just an idiot's joke, Minos replied, without giving many details. At that moment, the bald man in silver armor put his thoughts aside and asked aloud while looking at Minos with a murderous look. What did you do with the young master? Oh. If you're talking about that blonde idiot, well. You better go and see him. He might be needing your help. Minos said with a strange smile on his face. Although Luke was not hurt so badly that he was at risk of death, he still needed help. And even if Minos didn't want to create an even bigger problem for his newly initiated alliance with Elin, he still wanted to scare these guys. Miserable, if something happened to the young master, I will have no mercy. The bald man said as he placed one of his hands on a sword that was at his waist. 2 of you are going to check on the young master's situation. The rest are here to help me capture this bastard. Guard Brian said as he looked with the other Nash family subordinates. Meanwhile, Minos was heading for the building's exit as if none of this had anything to do with him. He then heard an angry cry from behind. Little bastard, don't even think about leaving. Now that you have attacked the young master, you will have to pay for your crimes in the Nash family. While saying this to Minos, Brian quickly turned his gaze to Ruth. If he wanted to capture Minos, he would have to go through this young woman first. BDNV. As for the remaining 2 guards, they were already prepared to act against Minos' 4 soldiers. Minos then looked at Ruth and said with a smile on his face, teasing the beautiful young woman beside him. Ruth, you talk so much about the greatness of your sect. Why don't you show me how capable you are? Humph, don't expect me always to help you in those months that I will be with you. Ruth warned him with a serious expression on her face. Soon after, Ruth activated her techniques and started to fight against the 3 subordinate men of the Nash family. Of these 3, the strongest was Guard Brian, who was at level 46, while the other 2 were at levels 43 and 44. Pow! Ruth quickly moved forward and started to press the 3 men towards the opposite side of the building while throwing several punches. She then approached the weaker guard and punched him in the face. Pow! Ah! The level 43 man screamed in pain as he fell after being punched in the face. His body staggered backward, falling to the ground next, as he tried to hold his face with unfocused eyes. This punch had sunk his nose, making him bleed heavily. Ah! At the same time, a mouthful of blood and a few teeth was spit out by him as he gradually lost consciousness. It did not take long and another guard, at level 44, had the same fate, falling to the ground while suffering from the serious damage caused by the beautiful young woman. With that, there was only the bald man, Brian, who was struggling with everything he had. Shit! Shit. How can she be so strong? Chapter 45. The Nash Family Patriarch. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Oh. Until this guy is very tough, he must be almost at level 47 to be able to last so long fighting with me. Ruth thought to herself as she pressed guard Brian. As to why she was able to fight those of a higher level, this was because of the silver-grade techniques that the young disciple of the Grey Cloud sect had. In addition to a specialized cultivation technique, she still had 3 others that are specialized in attack, defense, and moving. The movement technique was called Instant Steps, which increased the user's movement speed 3 times. As for the attack technique, it had the name of Fists of Pain, which could increase the strength of the user's punches by 100% and increase body hardness by 50% for each phase in which Ruth was in the technique. Fists of Pain. She then landed another blow in the direction of guard Brian's chest while the latter tried to defend himself. Bone blocking. Plop. ENV. Ah. You whore. Brian could not deflect the attack, leaving only to defend himself with his only black-grade defense technique. However, Ruth's attack was at least more than 30% more efficient than Brian's defense, so the defense of the bald man could not prevent such an attack from inflicting damage on its user. Meanwhile, Minus patiently watched Ruth destroy the defenses of these young Luke's subordinates. As I thought, her attack is certainly silver grade. Otherwise, she would not be able to break the defenses of someone higher than she is. Ruth and Brian continued this one-sided fight for a few more breaths when guard Brian finally fell to the ground unconscious. He had a pale expression on his face as he fell to the floor with a mouth soaked in blood. His armor had also been damaged, to the point of showing fist marks at the height of the guard's chest. At the same time, Ruth was almost exhausted from these struggles, with a fast breath and many drops of sweat on her beautiful face. After all, despite having silver-grade techniques, she did not have a devouring art like Minus. So, she had spent plenty of her energies to defeat those 3 guards. Not bad. It seems that you are not just talking. Let's go back to the hotel and rest for the rest of the day. Minus said as he smiled at Ruth. Upon hearing this, she just uttered a humph for that comment from Minus and then followed the group out of the building, where their carriage was standing. Soon after, the 6 people left the south side of the city and went to the Hotel Olsen, located in the central part of the old stone city. Meanwhile, on the 2nd floor of the building where the young Luke's trap had failed, 2 guards were helping their young master to pull himself together. That wretch was very strong. Luke exclaimed aloud, looking at the trail of blood that had remained there. Young master, rest assured, Chief Brian is going to hold that group, and we will be able to capture that brat. One of the guards said as he helped Luke steady himself. Come on, I can walk alone. You 2 go ahead and help guard Brian gets this over with. I will make that wretch tell all his secrets later. Luke said angrily. He had never been so brutally beaten before, and to make matters worse, the enemy was many levels weaker than he was. If word got out about it, his reputation would be completely thrown away. This would certainly damage his self-confidence. Ah. Shit. As he slowly descended the stairs, Luke heard a shout from the 1st floor. What happened? He then increased his speed to find out what had happened. When he reached the 1st floor, Luke was shocked by the image in front of him. The 3 guards who had stayed to hold Minus group were lying unconscious on the floor. Puddles of blood could be seen pouring from the mouths of the 3 men, while some teeth were still scattered around the site. Upon seeing this, Luke felt so frightened that the pains of his previous battle seemed to have grown even greater. His face had gone even paler than before as he tried to understand how it had happened. That's because, from Luke's point of view, 3 people who were at levels 43, 44 and 46, should be able to hold a group of 4 people at level 40 and the young woman at level 45. And even if they couldn't win, it would still be a tough fight, and certainly, the other side would not be better than his subordinates. However, there was no sign of the Minus group, as if they had ended the fight quickly and left. How did this happen? Is there someone else with the group? Luke thought to himself, as he had an ugly expression on his face. Shit. Now I have no choice but to tell my father what happened. I'm screwed when he finds out that I still lost a silver-grade technique. He'll want to kill me. Luke said in a low voice. Let's go back home. When these three wake up, I want a full report of what happened, do you hear? He said while looking at the two guards helping Ruth's victims. Time passed, and soon an entire day had passed since the groups of Minus and Luke had met. By this time, the news of Luke being beaten by someone had already spread through the Nash family palace, reaching Elend's ears. Miss Elend, I heard from one of the young Master Luke's subordinates that what happened was related to Mr. Minus, who had visited you 3 days ago. A servant said while helping young Elend to comb her beautiful blonde hair. So, that idiot was causing trouble for Mr. Minus. It seems that this time I have to do something about these chases from Luke. I can't let my business get in the way of him. Elend thought to herself. Do you know what Luke did in the meantime? Miss Elend, it looks like he's been at his residence all day since the incident happened. Well, keep an eye on him, and if he does anything different, come and tell me right away. A few hours passed, and at this point, Guard Brian was reporting everything that had happened to Luke. That's right, young master, only that woman had fought. She is much stronger than she looks, and she can fight those at the highest level. Brian said with a serious expression on his face. Shit. Everything was spoiled because of this woman. Now, if I want to recover the silver-grade cultivation technique that Minus stole from me, I can only appeal to my father. Luke spoke unhappily. That was the only alternative for him. After all, if Ruth could do all that, then to defeat her, they would probably need either a large number of subordinates or some specialist from the spiritual king stage. In both cases, Luke couldn't just get what he wanted without the Nash family's prior approval. And even though Luke was the son of the family patriarch, he had no contact with many of the family's spiritual kings. The few he knew definitely would not help him before speaking to the family patriarch. So, the young Luke had only one way to go, which was to appeal to his father. Shortly thereafter, Luke was walking towards the family patriarch's office. This was a place with a rustic look, with many books on some shelves and some pictures with images of Stone Island on the walls. There was a large table next to one of the windows in that office, with 2 chairs on one side and a large leather chair. At that moment, there was a middle-aged man with blonde hair and well-dressed in the room. He was reading a pile of documents while sitting in his comfortable armchair. This was Marvin Nash, the current patriarch of the Nash family and father of Luke, who had a black-grade talent, and level 58. Shortly after Luke entered his office, the middle-aged man realized that he still hadn't said anything, so he put the stack of documents aside and asked in a serious voice. Why did you come here, Luke? I don't think you just came to visit your old man, right? Luke then lowered his head and began to speak in a low voice. Dad, I underestimated someone and ended up being beaten by him. If it were just for this reason, I wouldn't have come here, but the problem is that he stole my spatial ring, which contained one of the copies of the silver-grade cultivation technique that our family has. Chapter 46. Luke's Punishment. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 46. Luke's punishment. At young Elend's residence, a young servant had just rushed in. Miss Elend, the young Master Luke went out to speak to the patriarch. TSH, it looks like it's time for me to go out and try to avoid a bigger setback. Elend said as she left her apartment to head towards Patriarch Marvin's office. What? Did you let him take one of the copies of our only silver-grade technique? The middle-aged man spoke angrily as he got up from his chair and hit the table hard. I couldn't do anything, Dad. He had completely defeated me, and one of the people who was with him was very strong. I believe that that woman can only be defeated by someone from the spiritual king stage. Luke said as he lowered his head in shame. The patriarch then tried to calm down for a second and then looked at Luke in the eye and said, "Tell me about these people first. Your punishment will come later. I don't know much about their group, only that they are not from Stone Island. In total, there are 12 people who seem to be led by this person who defeated me. Most of them are at level 40, but there is this woman, who is at level 45. Because of her, the guard Brian who was accompanying me was unable to prevent that guy from running away," Luke said, trying to hide the important, less details from his father. "And are they still here in the old stone?" While in a thoughtful position, Marvin asked, massaging his forehead with his fingers. Luke then said, "Yes, they are still here in the capital. In fact, they are staying at the Hotel Olsen, in the central part of the city. Less bad. But tell me how it all happened. Why would you want to deal with that person?" Luke looked at his father in front of him, hesitated for a moment, and then said, "He was courting one of my women. Because of that, I couldn't help myself and ended up acting recklessly against him." "Oh. So, this guy is that kind of scum. I understand, if it were me." Marvin was speaking when the door to his office slowly opened, and a middle-aged woman entered. She was a mature woman, gorgeous and with curves that could cheer anyone who saw her. And even though she already had some age marks, she was still quite graceful. She was wearing a beautiful blue dress and had short blonde hair. This was Patriarch Marvin's secretary. She then walked over to the side of the middle-aged man's chair and said, "Patriarch, the young Elin is here to see you. She says that her subject is urgent and that it has to do with the young Master Luke." When he heard this, Luke felt a chill down his spine, as if someone was arming him. What is it that Elin wants to talk to my father about? He thought to himself as he felt an indescribable tension. Marvin then replied, "Oh. It is unusual for the young Elin to come looking for me. It must be something significant. Let her in." He wasn't worried that it would mess up his affairs with Luke. After all, taking a few more minutes to clear up this situation wouldn't make much of a difference anyway. It didn't take long for Elin to come into the office and greet Patriarch Marvin before settling into one of the chairs. She was wearing a red robe, which enhanced her high-standard appearance well. After she settled down, Marvin took the initiative and asked with a smile on his face, "How can I help you, little Elin?" Actually, the subject in question must be the same as what Luke was talking to you about before I got here," Elin said without showing any change in her expression. "Oh. Shit." When he heard that, Luke's expression froze immediately. If someone paid attention to him now, they would probably think he was severely ill. Elin then continued. "Perhaps the Patriarch has already heard that Luke has feelings for me. But I already made it clear to him that we will never have that kind of relationship. However, he continues to chase all the men I know. Before, I had never done anything about it because none of those people he chased away had any greater relationship with me. They were just acquaintances. But this time, he tried to arm against an ally, so I can't allow it to continue." As he listened to this, Marvin's brows were furrowed more and more. He already knew that his son liked the daughter of the supreme elder of the Nash family, but that was their business, and he didn't care about minor things like that. Such a reaction was very normal in the spiritual world. Although some people still try to use the idea of arranged marriages to form alliances, most people disapproved of this type of situation or didn't even care about it. This was because, in the spiritual world, sexuality was quite liberal, and people cared more about having feelings for those they were going to marry. Another reason for this reality was that arranged marriages rarely worked. This is because, in many cases, one side always tried to act dominant. And that created many problems that could end up inciting betrayal on one side. So, it was not uncommon to find cases where an arranged relationship ended with one side being slaughtered by the other or, at least, severely damaged. Thus, arranged marriages were not very common in the spiritual world. And that was even more true for a commercial family like the Nash family. This is because, as a group that values stability, unpredictable situations that could arise from an agreement like this were not encouraged. So, Marvin didn't give a damn about his son's love affair. Marvin took a considerable look in Luke's direction and said, "Luke, you said that the person who beat you up had courted one of your women. You wouldn't be talking about little Elin, would you?" This. Luke ducked his head away from his father's gaze while he couldn't answer that simple question. "Humph, I already said that we don't have a relationship for you to call me your woman. As for the person who fought him, it was a new ally that I made on my last trip. He came to Stone Island just to settle some matters with me and buy items for his region." "Oh. So, he is now an ally boy. What do you have in your head?" Marvin said, disappointed, looking at the embarrassed Luke. He then continued. "But little Elin, your new ally still took the silver-grade cultivation technique, that was with this irresponsible son of mine. I cannot allow this technique to leave the family." Elin nodded and said, I didn't know that before. But he does have his justification for taking Luke's things since he was attacked without any justification. However, I think that this can be resolved diplomatically. We just need to reward Mr. Minus for the inconvenience. He's very sensible, and I'm sure we can reach an agreement." "Okay, so I'm going to let you take care of that, little Elin. But contact me as soon as this is resolved. As for you, Luke, you will first apologize to that person and stop disrupting the lives of people who don't want to be with you. Don't be immature. You are already 18 years old. But that will not be your whole punishment. Before, I would send you to the Western Empire when you turn 19 years old so that you could get to know this world better and maybe have some good opportunity. But since you don't seem worthy of the only vacancy that our family receives from the elemental sect every 10 years, then I will open a competition for that vacancy. If you want to regain that chance, then you will have to be in the top 10 in the spiritual tournament that will take place in the Cromwell Kingdom in a few months. Think about it in this like a second chance for you. If you are unable to complete this requirement, then I will give the vacancy to the member of our family who has the highest ranking after you," Marvin said with a hard expression on his face. This was an opportunity that the Nash family had every 10 years so that it couldn't be lost on an ungrateful idiot. So, even if Luke were his son, he wouldn't harm his family by throwing an opportunity like this out with him. To give you an idea, each member of the Nash family who used this opportunity grew better and faster. Many of them managed to reach level 50 after going to that empire and helped considerably in the development of the family. "I understand," Luke said as he deeply regretted it. "Shit. I really screwed up. Now I'm going to have to participate in this competition, instead of doing my business." He couldn't miss this incredible opportunity to go to the Western Empire. That's because this was not a place like the Flaming Empire. This was a force that could be at the top of the Central Continent. Chapter 47. Classifying a territory. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Regarding the subdivision of powers in the spiritual world, the classification of empires and kingdoms depended exclusively on two factors. That was the territorial area and the population. So, even if a territory had high-level powers, for example, with the presence of spiritual saints, it would still be a kingdom if it had a small population and territory. And for the northern region of the Central Continent, in addition to having small territories and low populations, it was also weaker places. This explains why there are no empires in this region and why it is equivalent in power. Of course, this was also a consequence of the reality of that region. This is because large territories can only be maintained when a great power can suppress separatist movements. And as there was not much difference between the top families in that region, this led to a subdivision of that part of the continent into several smaller areas, which can only be classified as kingdoms. As for the empires, it is also not equivalent in power since this factor depends on the size of the territory and the population and not on the strength of the specialists. But in general, to withstand the pressures of such a large region, it was generally necessary to have, at least, spiritual saint power to prevent these regions from being subdivided into several small kingdoms. However, there are empires in the spiritual world that go beyond this level, with even spiritual demigods in their leadership. But how could these regions differ so much in power? This is simple. In the spiritual world, some families are heirs of individuals who have reached level 100, gods. BDNVL.M. Because of this, the empires or kingdoms that had one of these families in their territories would have spatial kingdoms, which enabled a more significant number of highly talented inhabitants and a greater amount of high-level resources for these regions. And that was the difference between the Flaming Empire and the Western Empire. Despite having territories and populations almost equivalent and even several high-level spiritual regions, these places still had a massive difference in power. That's because the Flaming Empire has not given birth to any family that has inherited a god in all of history. This explained why the Nash family valued this one spot so much that they received from the elemental sect. As to why they have such contact, this is because Stone Island is not exactly on the central continent. So, it was much easier for them to reach other parts of that continent. Like any large territory located on an island, Stone Island had an outstanding maritime strength. For this reason, they developed their ships at a higher level than the kingdoms of the northern region of the central continent from an early stage in their history. They also had detailed knowledge of the different sea routes and maps of other parts of that great continent. This was something that the kingdoms of the northern region of that continent did not have. However, Stone Island could still be considered as part of the northern part of the central continent when analyzing some of its characteristics. With the average strength of the population, the spiritual density, the proximity of the island to that part of the continent, etc. But due to its location and the advantages of its more advanced knowledge about navigation, the Nash family had long been able to make contact with the power of the Western Empire, obtaining this opportunity to send one of its members there every 10 years. Anyway, while young Luke mourned his significant loss in this situation, Minos had finally found a grade .2 array master. Not only that, he was fortunate that this specialist had a grade .2, low.grade, spiritual meeting array to be sold. With that, he spent his 500 medium.grade crystals, having yet to put another 100,000 low-grade crystals in that deal. The problem was that he didn't have the total amount of crystals from that classification to make the deal. So, he had to exchange some low.grade crystals to buy the spiritual meeting array. And with that, he just needed to wait for a few more days until all the grade .1 spiritual pills he had ordered from different stores in the old stone town were ready. With that, he will be able to return to his territories and then begin to solve the labor problem of the Black Plain. But before that, Minos still had some issues to resolve on Stone Island, such as visiting beautiful Elena and making certain points with Elon about starting to market his items. However, even before taking the initiative to arrange a meeting with Elon, she had asked to meet with Minos. "Young master, Miss Elon has arrived at the hotel, and she is coming here." One of Minos' soldiers came to inform him. After a while, a beautiful young blonde woman, wearing a completely white dress, came through the door of the living room of the apartment where Minos was. But to Minos' surprise, she was not alone but was also accompanied by a certain young man. The blonde, green-eyed young man, who was wearing a long silver robe and had a look of discontent on his face. This was Luke, who came under orders from his father, to apologize to Minos. Oh. So, this guy came with her. This must be about the items I took from this idiot. Minos thought to himself, with a smile on his face. At that moment, the soldiers in the room left, leaving only Minos, Ruth, Elon, and Luke in the room. Ruth didn't want to leave, as she really enjoyed watching others' problems. After all, in a place like this, where she had a lot of free time, watching those occasions was a form of entertainment for her. Minus also didn't care that she overheard his conversations, as it certainly wouldn't be a big deal for someone coming from the Grey Cloud sect, like Ruth, and he wouldn't talk about any secrets with Elin. She was also a disciple of Minus' mother, so she certainly wouldn't try to harm him on purpose. At least there was no reason for that. As well, she would be leaving soon after the spiritual tournament. So, the young Stuart saw no problem with her here. While Ruth was comfortably seated in a large armchair, Elin and Luke settled on a sofa next to Minus's chair. "It is good to see you again, Miss Elin. Can I know the reason for this visit?" Minus asked without making small talk. "It's good to see you too. I came to talk about the silver dot grade technique that was inside the spatial ring that Mr. Minus collected from Luke," she said with a smile on her face. As expected, he thought while listening to what Elin said. "But before that, Luke, don't you want to say anything to Mr. Minus?" Elin said, looking at the young blonde man, who had an embarrassed expression on his face. While he had a face completely red with shame and anger, Luke tried to calm himself by thinking about the general situation. "Calm down. Calm down. This is for my own good. The most important thing is for me to be able to regain my father's confidence and get this spot for the elemental sect. For a nobleman, waiting even decades to get revenge is not the end of the world. When I get back from the Western Empire, I will be able to settle accounts with this guy." Luke thought, as he recovered from the embarrassment of this situation. At the same time, Minus had the corners of his lips up. He thought, this guy isn't here to apologize, is he? At that moment, the blond young man took a breath and said, "Mr. Minus, forgive me for what happened. I made a mistake and ended up attacking an ally of our family without reason. I'm really sorry for what happened. This guy really knows how to swallow his pride when he should. At least he's not a complete waste of our Nash family's resources." Elin thought, watching the way Luke was acting. After that, Elin took the initiative and returned to speak. "I know that Mr. Minus deserves to receive retribution for what happened, and I dare say that if I were in your place, I would also collect my opponent's items. But this silver dot grade technique is essential for our family. Although we have several copies of it, letting someone outside the family get one of them could bring a lot of problems for us. Cultivators could create the spiritual techniques in question with high understanding and a certain spiritual level. For example, to develop a golden dot grade technique, it would be necessary to be at level 100 to do such a thing. In order to create a white dot grade technique, the minimum required level of spiritual power would be equivalent to level 40. In order to create copies, this was done from the original parchment of the technique. The only things necessary for this were the materials to store the spirituality of the technique and a cultivator with a certain level. For example, to create a copy of a silver dot grade technique, the cultivator needed to be at least level 59. For a golden dot grade technique, the person creating the copy would have to be at least level 79 to succeed. Elin then continued. "That way, I would like to negotiate this copy with Mr. Minus. Since it is just a copy, this technique could be sold for at least 2,000 medium dot grade crystals. Therefore, we will pay you 3,000 medium dot grade crystals for you, as we also offend an ally with Luke's recent actions." Elin then sighed and said, "With that, I hope that our relationship will not be affected." Chapter 48. 9-Tailed Fox. You are listening at novelfull.audio. That's fine with me, but if there is a second time, don't wait for any negotiations, Minus said as he stared at young Luke. He did not need a silver dot grade technique, as he already had many that Henricus Longus had left. In fact, getting black dot grade techniques was more important to Minus. This is because he had not yet reached a level where he could exhibit silver dot grade techniques as if they were common things by giving them to all his subordinates. Thus, Minus needed a good number of black dot grade techniques to make them available to the soldiers of the Black Plain Army. And he didn't have many techniques like that since his father had only left 3 of these as an inheritance. For this reason, gathering techniques of this degree was a priority in relation to obtaining other techniques of a higher grade. In doing so, he would avoid exposing his secrets and would maintain a force well prepared for the standards of the northern region of the central continent. As for the silver grade techniques, Minos would only allow the best and most talented soldiers to learn. And for the golden grade ones, only he and Dillion would have the pleasure of training them. At least, it would take a long time for someone else to have this opportunity. Oh. He doesn't seem to care much about a technique like that. Does he already practice any equivalent grade cultivation technique? Elin thought to herself as she saw that Minos didn't even try to negotiate an even higher price. Ha! That was easier than I thought. Ha! I bet this guy is afraid of losing his alliance with our family. But this is better. It makes things easier for me. Luke thought with a small smile on his face. Well, since that is the case, I will give the crystals to you. Elin said as she took a bag out of her spatial ring. After that, Minos returned the silver grade technique that he had collected from Luke and handed it to the young Elin. They also took advantage of this occasion to settle the final points of the negotiation of the Black Plain with the young trader Elin. Meanwhile, somewhere near the border between the Black Plain and the Kingdom of the Waves, there was a place with some rock formations, with a river running between the mountains and going on to a cave. In that place, there was a spiritual beast about 1.5 meters high, with fur in orange on the back and white on the belly. She had big brown eyes, with an upright pupil and a completely black snout. But what would surely catch the eye of anyone who saw it would be the 5 beautiful tails, which were stretched upward. Many people might not recognize this spiritual beast in the north of the central continent, but if Minos saw it, he would immediately know that it was a 9-tailed fox. Minos knew this due to the inheritance of the god Henricus Longus, of course, who had known every kind of spiritual beast in his long life. As for the 9-tailed foxes, well, they are a breed of beasts from the continent of the beast, a place very far from where Minos was at this time. And as for the quality of the lineage of this breed, despite not being among the group with the best bloodlines, the 9-tailed foxes could still reach level 89, the limit of the 9th stage. This race of spiritual beast also had a unique characteristic in the world of beasts, which was the number of tails. Each tail in a 9-tailed fox represents a stage of cultivation. So, as they are born at level 0, the fox in question was already in the 5th stage of cultivation. The fox then walked around the cave and, after a while, stopped to rest beside the place where there was a water passage. She drank some water while closing her eyes and lying there, showing a big bulge in her belly. This place will serve for me to give birth to my baby. She was pregnant, so she had gone to that region, close to the Black Plain. This is because, for both spiritual and human beasts, delivery is a time of great fragility for females who have to go through this. That way, if any of them doesn't have a protected place to give birth, then the last way out would be to find a weaker and less exposed area to spend the first few days with their child. As to why she was here on the central continent and not on the continent of the beast, well, only she knew it herself. "Come on, my baby, mommy wants to meet you," she said in a non-human language. Another day passed, and Minos had already collected another round of spiritual pills in the different alchemy stores that he had previously visited. There was not much else for him to do on the stone island, so he was already preparing to leave the old stone town. But before that, he was going to meet the graceful Elena tonight. He was almost ready to leave as he watched himself in a mirror in his room. He was wearing gray jeans, a long sleeved blue shirt, and a comfortable black overcoat. He then left his room and went to the apartment's living room, heading towards the exit of the place. At that moment, Ruth saw that Minos intended to leave, and then she approached and asked him, "Where are we going now?" "I'm going to Elena's residence, but I think you better stay here," Minos said with a provocative tone. "Ha!" When she heard that, Ruth's face was completely red with embarrassment. Just by remembering that woman's way of behaving, she was already uncomfortable. She then turned and left, heading for the room she had rented at the Hotel Olsen. He really will do that with that bitch. After that, Minos followed with 4 more soldiers towards the south side of the capital of Stone Island, the place where the Neal family mansion was. Not long after, Minos's carriage drove for a few minutes through the old stone city until they could see a beautiful mansion on top of a mountain. There was a large area covered with trees, with a small road leading to the mansion's entrance. At that point, a gate over 3 meters high had a beautiful red hammer symbol in its center. This was the symbol of the Neal family, a family of blacksmiths. Upon arriving at the mansion, Minos soon noticed that this place was completely different from the Nash family palace. While the latter featured a large building, with no other buildings nearby, the Neal family mansion could be seen as a collection of different structures that formed a beautiful mosaic. In fact, from a distance, one would think that this was just one building, but getting closer, you would see that they are different buildings. Between these places, there were buildings of different sizes and colors. While enjoying the view of the beautiful landscape created by the combination of these buildings, a guard stopped Minos's carriage. "Welcome to the Neal family. Identify yourselves and state your purpose for this visit," the guard said politely. One of the soldiers, who were in front of Minos's carriage, then answered. The young master Minos Stewart is here to visit Miss Elena Neal." After hearing this, the guard smiled and said while making some hand gestures to the soldier who had responded. "Oh. I understand. Miss Elena had already left her permission for Mr. Minos to enter. Follow that path." After a while, Minos' carriage stopped at a place close to Elena's residence, and the group of 4 soldiers stayed in that place, while Minos followed the rest of the path alone. It didn't take long, and he arrived at a building with 4 floors, which had a fascinating shape. It looked like several squares stacked in 2 different models. In one, there were glass balconies, and in the other, there were large windows surrounded by a beautiful brick wall. Minos then went up to the top floor, where Elena's residence was. Ring. The low-level spiritual array that simulated a bell rang, and a beautiful young woman with blonde hair answered the door. She was wearing a short white dress that accentuated every detail of the sensual silhouette of the beautiful Elena. She indeed was charming, to the point of attracting even heterosexual women. Minos watched her slowly with a smile on his face. Soon he said. "It's good to see you again, Elena. Soon I will be leaving Stone Island, so I came here to have that special dinner of yours, Bedo-mo." "That's right?" she asked as she approached Minos slowly. She brought her mouth close to the young steward's ear and said it sensuously. "I hope you are prepared to taste my meat. It is really spicy. I hope not too much for you." Although I've never tasted this kind of flavor before, I'm sure I can handle it," Minos said, pulling on Elena's thin waist. They then began to kiss passionately while Minos began to explore Elena's good curves, and she had both hands behind the young man's neck. It didn't take long, and the two went into the apartment. Chapter 49. The first time, 18+, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Minos and Elena kissed as if they were completely in love with each other, while their excitement gradually increased. One could hear the sound of their hearts beating rapidly, and certain natural reactions began to appear little by little. They enjoyed each other's taste as they slowly went to the young Elena's room. Eventually, Minos and Elena broke their passionate kiss and smiled at each other, breathing heavily. They had arrived at the young blonde's room when she finally said, "Take my clothes off." After hearing this, Minos watched the young woman in front of him for a second, took a breath, and started to remove her dress. He was not nervous, even though this was his first time. But this time, it was not because he had the knowledge of the sexual life of the god Henricus Longus. He didn't receive this kind of knowledge. But because the other knowledge that he had received had transformed him into a more calm person. And even in situations like this, he would not lose that way of being. Minus slowly pulled on the sexy blonde's short dress in front of him, gradually revealing Elena's flawless body. She wore erotic underwear, in black and red, which further sharpened her partner's instincts. Meanwhile, Elena slowly unbuttoned Minus' shirt with one hand and removed the belt from his pants with the other. It was clear that she had experience in this matter, given the skill with which she did this. But Elena was not as easy a woman as it may seem. Initially, she had only played with Elon when she said that about Minus. But after accompanying the young Stuart for 2 days, she had aroused the desire to sleep with him. Minus then softly kissed Elena's neck while finally managing to get her bra off. When he calmly pulled away from the girl's neck and saw the perfect breasts in front of him. It was neither too big nor small, it was just the right size, which felt great when you took them with your hands. After contemplating the beauty of those pink and medium-sized nipples, he began to massage it. It was delightful to massage breasts like these, which almost fit perfectly in the hands. Elena let out a slight moan as she felt her breasts stimulated by Minus. At the same time, she noticed a considerable increase in the size of the younger brother of the young man in front of her, to the point of almost jumping out of his clothes. Minus then released Elena's breasts for a moment, removing his underwear. In doing so, the beautiful blonde almost made a sound of surprise when she saw Minus' stick. It wasn't overly large, but it was still about 7 inches (17.78 centimeters) long and a suitable thickness. It was definitely a size to be proud of. Elena then knelt on the bed, showing Minus her beautiful lower cheeks. He could see the beautiful image of her ass, in front of him, still in her red panties, but with a small piece of pink flesh to sample. Looking at this, Minus couldn't help himself and quickly removed the last piece of cloth from Elena's body. He finally saw the pink, small flower, which was already dripping with the nectar of love. This view was so inviting that Minus slowly approached to prove it. He first sniffed it and then started kissing Elena's beautiful flower. Ah, she moaned softly when she felt Minus' tongue touch her intimate part, making her shiver all over her body. While enjoying the sweet taste of Elena, Minus also gently caressed her breasts, which were already stiff from the excitement caused by the act. She was breathing erratically when she broke the contact of Minus's mouth with her little sister. Come on. Let's change the position. Soon after, the two were in a 69-foot position. This position was extraordinary. Minus could prepare the ground, increasing the sensitivity of Elena's flower, while she could lubricate his stick, resulting in a perfect combination. Several sounds could be heard from the couple, who were now tasting each other's private parts. Soon, a few minutes passed, and both youths were already thirsty to begin the most exciting part of their activity. It didn't take long, and the beautiful Elena lay on the bed while Minus came over her, in a position where the two could look at each other. Elena then raised her legs to make things easier for Minus while he slowly rubbed his stick on the mottled flower in front of him. Minus could feel the heat coming from Elena's body when he slowly started to penetrate her, squeezing the juices of love all the way. When he saw that part of his member had entered it, Minus looked into her eyes as he sank his rod lower and deeper. Oh my goodness, Elena let out a loud moan at the moment Minus penetrated her deeply. However, before she could continue, the young Stuart held her head and leaned down to start kissing her again. The two stayed in that position for a while Minus pressed his pelvis to Elena's clitoris. The couple of lovers would break their kisses and breathe intensely, making even more erotic sounds in the air from time to time. For some time, Minus' rod continued to pierce Elena's cave in a piston motion while the bed slowly became seeped with the couple's fluids. This was also leaving the room with a dense smell, which was characteristic of this act. Minus then said in an uneven voice as he stopped for a moment and looked at the sweaty body of the young blonde beneath him. You are incredible. Let me help you out a little. She said with a happy smile on her face as she pushed Minus down and climbed on him. Elena took Mina's stick and positioned it at her little sister's entrance while looking him in the eye. She slowly sat down and started to ride, making sounds of pounding meat in the room. Pa. 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 Ah, I can feel it in my belly, Elena said while having an unholy expression on her beautiful face. She was not used to having partners the size of Minas, so she was making the most of it. Seeing this, Minas further increased the up and down while gently caressing Elena's pink nipples, making her moan even louder. Yes, make me come, she said, trying to breathe and suppress her beautiful sounds, which expressed all the pleasure she felt. Meanwhile, Minas' rod was tightened more and more through Elena's hole, further increasing the pleasure for the young steward. That way, it wouldn't take long for him to climax as well. Ha, 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 I'm coming. Ha. Minas said breathlessly, with a look of complete pleasure in his eyes. I can't either hold on anymore. The two quickly reached their climax while she squirted at Minas, with Elena's beautiful hole contracting even more than usual, creating a perfect moment for both of them. After that, the entire white content of Minas' stick began to fill every space in Elena's uterus, allowing a surplus part to run down the sides of the inner walls of the young woman's hole. When that happened, Elena slowly started to shake when she finally fell on Minas's bare chest, breathing heavily. The two then began to hug and kiss while they were still connected to each other. Ha, 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 how was it for you? Minas asked, with a satisfied look on his face. Ha, ha, very good. You surprised me a lot. I thought it would take you a little longer to get the hang of it, but you were just perfect, she said, with a sincere smile on her face. And she told the truth, even in a libertine world like the spiritual world, it was not all men who treated their partners so well and gave importance to female pleasure. And for a virgin, Minas demonstrated an even greater than average ability in bed. Even some experienced people with whom the beautiful Elena had already had her experiences. A few minutes passed, and the two youngsters returned to their pleasure activities, leaving the environment increasingly rich in the two youths' aroma and sounds of pleasure. And when they finished their last round, Elena's beautiful flower was soaked entirely with Minas' white liquid. However, neither of them would have to worry about an unwanted pregnancy. This is because, with the advent of spiritual energy, cultivators could easily prevent this from happening. Men could render the released sperm unusable, and women could destroy the oocytes that were released during their fertile period. And of course, there was another way to prevent pregnancy, which was to have sex with people who are often weaker or much stronger than you. This is because the body cells carried energy equivalent to the level at which the person was. In other words, the sperm of a god had so much energy that if it were combined with an oocyte from a spiritual emperor, even if neither took measures against it, fertilization would still be impracticable. But for Minas and Elena, who were just having fun, neither of them would allow that to happen since the energy difference between the two was not so great. That way, they were both careful to prevent something unwanted from happening. And slowly, the night passed, and the sun started to rise on the horizon when Minas and Elena slept comfortably in the young blonde's messy bed.